The humid Caribbean air clung to Isabella's skin like a second layer as she descended the marble steps of her father's plantation house. Palm fronds rustled overhead, whispering secrets she wasn't meant to hear. The morning sun painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, but today, even paradise felt tainted with an unspoken dread. Isabella, my dear daughter. Governor Rodrigo Vasquez's voice carried across the courtyard, smooth as aged rum yet sharp as a cutlass. He stood beside three men she didn't recognize, rough-hewn figures whose clothes bore the salt stains of long sea voyages. Her bare feet touched the warm cobblestones as she approached, the silk of her emerald dress catching the tropical breeze. "Father, who are these gentlemen?" Rodrigo's smile never reached his eyes. "Business associates, mi niña. From Port Royal." The way he pronounced those words made her stomach turn. Port Royal, haven of pirates, smugglers, and men who traded in human flesh. Captain Blackwood, the leader of the three, stepped forward. His weathered face bore scars that spoke of countless battles, and his grin revealed gold teeth that glinted like warning signals. "So this is the merchandise." "Merchandise?" Isabella's voice cracked like a whip. "Father, what is he talking about?" Rodrigo's hand trembled slightly as he poured himself a glass of wine from the silver pitcher on the nearby table. The Caribbean sun caught the ruby liquid, making it look like spilled blood. "Isabella, you must understand. The drought ruined our sugar crops. The Spanish crown demands their taxes. I had no choice. No choice for what?" But even as the words left her lips, she saw the iron shackles in Blackwood's weathered hands. 5,000 pieces of 8, Blackwood announced with the casual air of a merchant discussing the price of coffee beans. "Plus safe passage for your other shipments." The world tilted beneath Isabella's feet. The tropical warmth suddenly felt suffocating, pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. "You're selling me." It wasn't a question. It was the terrible understanding of a daughter's worst nightmare made real. "The pirate general pays well for quality," Blackwood continued, his cold eyes appraising her like livestock. "Spanish nobility, untouched, educated. You'll fetch a pretty price in his private collection?" "Collection?" Isabella's voice rose to a scream that sent the colorful parrots fleeing from the nearby mango trees. "I am not a commodity, father."
"I am your daughter."
Rodrigo drained his wineglass in one gulp, unable to meet her blazing eyes. "You'll have a better life than what awaits us here, Isabella. The general, he's not without refinement. You'll live in luxury aboard the finest ship in the Caribbean. As a prisoner," she lunged toward him, but Blackwood's men were faster. Rough hands seized her arms and the cold bite of iron closed around her wrists. The shackles were heavy, dragging her delicate hands downward like anchors. "Please," she whispered, her proud spirit cracking like glass. "Father, please." "I'll find another way. I'll marry whoever you choose. I'll go." "It's done, Isabella." Rodrigo's voice broke on her name. For a moment she saw a flicker of the father she had known, the man who had taught her to read, who had protected her from suitors he deemed unworthy, but that man was drowning in desperation and greed. The general's ship arrives with tomorrow's tide. As they dragged her toward the waiting carriage, Isabella's mind raced like a hurricane gathering strength. The cobblestones beneath her feet had been laid by her grandfather, each stone placed with love for the family he was building. Now they witnessed the destruction of that legacy. "Forgive me," Rodrigo called after her, his voice barely audible over the sound of iron wheels on stone. Isabella turned back, her dark eyes blazing with fury and heartbreak. "Forgiveness is earned, father, and you have sold yours for 30 pieces of silver." The reference to Judas hung in the air like smoke from a burning ship. The carriage door slammed shut with the finality of a tomb closing. Through the barred window, she watched her childhood home shrink into the distance, palm trees swaying in the trade winds like mourners at a funeral. That night, locked in a dank room above a Port Royal tavern, Isabella pressed her face against the salt-crusted window. The harbor stretched before her, filled with vessels of every description, merchant ships, naval frigates, and the dark silhouettes of pirate craft. Somewhere out there beyond the horizon, a ship sailed toward her destiny. The pirate general, even whispered in the shadows of respectable society, his name carried weight. They said he commanded a fleet of 20 ships. They said he had never lost a battle. They said he collected rare treasures the way other men collected coins, and tomorrow, she would become his newest acquisition. Isabella closed her eyes and pressed her shackled hands to her chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart. She was Governor Vasquez's daughter, descended from conquistadors and nobility. Her blood carried the strength of women who had crossed oceans and built empires. They could chain her body, but they would discover that her spirit was forged from sterner stuff than gold. The morning of her departure dawned gray and threatening. As if the very heavens protested this transaction, Isabella stood on the rotting pier, her silk dress replaced with rough cotton. More fitting, Blackwood had sneered, for her new station. The harbor reeked of fish, tar, and human misery. Other prisoners shuffled past in chains, their eyes hollow with despair. But Isabella held her head high, refusing to let her captors see her break. The shackles on her wrists had rubbed her skin raw, but she wore the pain like armor. There she is, Blackwood whispered with reverent fear, pointing toward the harbor mouth. The crimson tide. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The ship emerging from the morning mist was unlike anything she had ever seen. 3 masts reached toward the storm clouds like the fingers of some ancient god, their black sails emblazoned with a crimson skull crowned in gold. The hull gleamed like polished obsidian, and bronze cannons bristled from her sides like the spines of a sea monster. But it was the figure standing at the bow that made Isabella's heart skip like a stone across water. Even from this distance, the pirate general commanded attention. He stood motionless as a statue, his long black coat whipping in the wind. His hair, dark as a moonless night, was tied back with a leather cord, and even the hardened pirates around him seemed to shrink in his presence. Captain Alejandro Valdez, Blackwood muttered. They call him El Sombra, the Shadow. They say he can appear and disappear like smoke, that he's made a pact with the sea itself. The crimson tide glided into port with supernatural grace, her anchor chains rattling like the bones of dead enemies. A gangplank slapped against the pier with the sound of a closing trap, and then he was there. Captain Valdez moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step calculated and precise. Up close, Isabella could see that the stories had not prepared her for the reality. His face was a masterwork of angles and shadows, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, but it only added to his dangerous appeal. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with the weathered bronze skin of a man who had spent his life under the tropical sun. When his gaze found hers, the world seemed to hold its breath. So, his voice was like aged whiskey, smooth, warm, and intoxicating. His Spanish accent colored his English words with exotic music. "This is the governor's daughter." Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his stare without flinching. "I am Isabella Maria Vasquez de Montemayor. And you, Captain, are a man who deals in human flesh." A smile played at the corners of his mouth, not cruel but amused. "Careful, Princesa. Your pride is showing." He circled her slowly like a shark evaluating prey. "But I suppose that's what I paid for. Fire, spirit, something rare in these waters." "I am not a thing to be bought and sold," Isabella spat, her voice carrying across the harbor. Several dock workers turned to stare, drawn by the electric tension between the elegant prisoner and the legendary pirate. And yet, Valdez stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and sea spray. "Here you are, with a price on your head and chains on your wrists." His eyes dropped to the raw marks on her skin, and something flickered across his features. Anger? Blackwood stepped forward, eager to complete the transaction. 5,000 pieces of 8 as agreed. She's untouched, educated, speaks 4 languages. "Did I ask for your sales pitch?" Valdez's voice cut through Blackwood's words like a blade through silk. The smaller man stumbled backward, suddenly remembering who he was addressing. The pirate captain turned back to Isabella, his storm gray eyes studying her face. "What languages?" "Spanish, English, French, and Portuguese," she answered, confused by the question. "Impressive. And what does an educated lady know of the world beyond her father's mansion?" "I know that the Caribbean is controlled by men who mistake cruelty for strength and gold for honor," Isabella replied without hesitation. "I know that you command through fear rather than respect, and I know that no amount of treasure can buy you what you truly seek." Several of his crew members shifted nervously, hands moving toward their weapons. But Valdez threw back his head and laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed across the water. "Dios mío," he exclaimed. "She has fangs, this one. His expression grew serious again. Tell me, Princessa, what do I truly seek? Isabella studied his face, noting the intelligence in his eyes, the careful way he held himself, the respect his men showed him despite their obvious fear. Legitimacy, she said quietly. You have power, wealth, fear. But you want to be more than just another pirate who will be forgotten when the next tide comes in. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Valdez's crew watched their captain with the intensity of men whose lives might depend on his next words. Finally, Valdez smiled again, but this time it reached his eyes. Remove her chains, Captain? Blackwood squeaked. The payment will be honored, but guests aboard the Crimson Tide don't wear shackles. He watched as one of his men unlocked Isabella's bonds, his eyes never leaving her face. Welcome aboard, Isabella Maria Vasquez de Montemayor. Try not to jump overboard on your first night. The sharks in these waters have expensive tastes. As the heavy iron fell from her wrists, Isabella rubbed the raw skin and met his gaze steadily. I don't run from my problems, Captain. I face them head on. Then you and I are going to get along very well indeed, Valdez replied, offering his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady to dinner rather than a pirate claiming his prize. Shall we? Isabella ignored his offered arm and walked up the gangplank alone, her head held high. Behind her, she heard Valdez chuckle again, a sound that sent unexpected warmth through her chest. As the Crimson Tide prepared to leave port, Isabella stood at the rail watching Jamaica disappear into the morning haze. Her father had sold her for gold, but as the tropical wind filled the black sails above her head, she wondered if he had accidentally bought her something far more valuable than safety, freedom. Isabella's quarters aboard the Crimson Tide were nothing like the dungeon she had expected. The cabin was spacious, with tall windows that looked out over the endless blue of the Caribbean Sea. Rich mahogany furniture filled the room, and silk curtains in deep crimson matched the ship's name. Books lined one wall, volumes in multiple languages, their leather spines worn with use. Surprised, Princessa? Valdez appeared in the doorway, no longer wearing his intimidating captain's coat. In simple white linen and black leather, he looked less like a fearsome pirate and more like a nobleman at leisure. Isabella ran her fingers along the spines of the books, recognizing works by Cervantes, Shakespeare, and Voltaire. Pirates who read philosophy. What's next? Mermaids who sing opera. You'd be surprised what one finds in the cargo holds of Spanish treasure ships, he replied, entering the room with that same predatory grace. Along with gold and silver, they often carry the real treasures, knowledge, art, culture. Stolen treasures, Isabella corrected, but her tone lacked its earlier venom. The sight of so many beloved books had softened something inside her. Everything is stolen from someone, if you trace it back far enough. Valdez moved to the windows, gazing out at the horizon where storm clouds were gathering. Your father's plantation was built on land taken from the Taino people. The Spanish Empire's gold was mined by enslaved hands. At least when I steal, I'm honest about it. Isabella wanted to argue, but the truth in his words stung like salt in a wound. So you justify your crimes with philosophy? I justify nothing. I simply choose to take from those who have taken from others. He turned back to her, his expression serious. Your father, for instance. Do you know how he maintains his wealth while other plantation owners fail? Hard work. Good management. But even as she said the words, Isabella remembered her father's mysterious nighttime visitors, the hushed conversations that stopped whenever she appeared. Valdez smiled without humor. Smuggling, Principessa. Your beloved father has been running contraband through Spanish customs for years. Weapons, exotic goods, sometimes people. The only difference between us is that I don't pretend to be respectable while doing it. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. She sank into a chair, her mind reeling. You're lying. Why would I lie? You're already here. What would I gain? Valdez poured himself a glass of wine from a crystal decanter and offered her one. When she shook her head, he continued. The drought didn't ruin your father's crops, Isabella. His business partners did, when they discovered he was skimming profits from their joint ventures. Isabella's hands shook as the pieces fell into place. The late-night meetings, the sudden appearance of gold in their accounts, her father's increasing paranoia about Spanish tax collectors. So he sold me to pay his debts, she whispered. He sold you to save his own skin, Valdez corrected. My associates were becoming impatient with his excuses. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Isabella stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, vast and indifferent to human suffering. "What do you want from me?" Valdez set down his wineglass and moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What makes you think I want anything? Men like you always want something. Power, wealth, revenge. What is it?" His reflection appeared in the glass beside hers, his storm-gray eyes meeting her dark ones in the window's surface. "Perhaps I simply wanted to meet the woman brave enough to call me a coward to my face." Isabella turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. The scent of sandalwood and sea spray filled her senses, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. "I never called you a coward. You said I command through fear rather than respect. Same thing, to a man like me." His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, and something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "And do you command through fear?" Instead of answering, Valdez stepped back and walked to his desk. He pulled out a leather portfolio and extracted a document with an official seal. "Tell me, educated lady, what do you make of this?" Isabella took the document, her brow furrowing as she read. It was written in Spanish, with the seal of the Viceroy of New Spain. "It's a letter of marque?" "Indeed, signed by the Viceroy himself, authorizing Captain Alejandro Valdez to attack and capture vessels flying under foreign flags. In other words, Princessa, I am not a pirate at all. I am a privateer in service to the Spanish crown." The document fluttered from Isabella's nerveless fingers. A privateer, a legal pirate authorized by the government to prey on enemy shipping. But everyone calls you the pirate general. You're wanted by every naval force in the Caribbean, by the English and French naval forces, certainly. But to Spain, I am a patriot. The problem is, he retrieved the document and returned it to his desk. The English control most of the Caribbean now. Being a Spanish privateer makes one a hunted man. Isabella's mind raced as she processed this revelation. So you prey on English shipping to serve Spain, but Spain can't protect you from English retaliation. You're caught between two worlds. Now you begin to understand. Valdez moved to the bookshelf, pulling out a slim volume. Like you, I am a prisoner of circumstances beyond my control. The difference is I chose my cage. And what cage have you chosen for me? He turned back to her, the book still in his hands. That, Princessa, depends entirely on you. Thunder rumbled overhead as the storm clouds finally opened, sending tropical rain against the windows in sheets. In the sudden darkness, candles flickered to life throughout the cabin, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I could throw you overboard," Valdez continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather, "or sell you in Port Royal, or keep you locked in this cabin until we reach whatever destination strikes my fancy." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. Or I could offer you a choice that no one else ever has." He moved closer again, his eyes intense in the candlelight. "Join my crew, not as a prisoner or a trophy, but as a member of this family. Use your education, your languages, your obvious intelligence to help us navigate the treacherous waters of Caribbean politics." "You want me to become a pirate?" "I want you to become yourself," he replied. "Not your father's obedient daughter or some man's decorative wife, but the woman I see in your eyes, the one who would rather burn than bow." The offer hung in the air between them like smoke from cannon fire. Outside, lightning illuminated the churning sea, and Isabella realized that her old life was already gone. Her father had seen to that when he chose gold over blood. The question now was what she would build from the ashes. 3 weeks had passed since Isabella had made her choice, and the Caribbean had never seen anything like what she had become. Standing on the quarterdeck of the Crimson Tide as it cut through the crystal blue waters off the coast of Tortuga, Isabella no longer resembled the pampered governor's daughter who had been sold like cattle. Her silk gowns had been replaced with practical leather and linen, a fitted bodice in deep burgundy, black leather breeches, and tall boots that allowed her to move freely across the deck. Her long dark hair was braided with gold cord and adorned with the spoils of their recent victories. Emerald earrings taken from a French merchant vessel, and a ruby pendant that had once belonged to an English duchess. Ship approaching from the northwest. The lookout called from the crow's nest. Isabella raised the spyglass to her eye, studying the approaching vessel. "English colors," she announced to Valdez, who stood beside her at the ship's wheel. "Looks like a Royal Navy frigate, but she's flying a merchant flag as well." Trying to fool us into thinking they're harmless traders, Valdez observed with a smile. What do you think, Mirena? Do we believe their deception? Mirena, my queen! The endearment still sent warmth through Isabella's chest, though she had earned it through more than romance. In 3 short weeks, she had proven herself invaluable to the crew, her linguistic skills allowing her to interrogate prisoners and negotiate with port authorities, her noble education helping her forge convincing documents, and her strategic mind making their raids more profitable and less bloody. I think, Isabella said, lowering the spyglass, that honest merchants don't need to fly false colors, and I think we could use whatever cargo they're so eager to hide. Valdez's grin was sharp as a cutlass blade. As you wish, Capitana. The title was not mere flattery. After Isabella had successfully planned their raid on a Spanish treasure convoy, using her knowledge of colonial politics to predict their route, Valdez had declared her his co-captain. The crew had initially grumbled about taking orders from a woman, but Isabella's quick thinking had saved them from an English trap just days later, earning their grudging respect. Now as the crimson tide bore down on the unsuspecting frigate, Isabella felt the familiar thrill of the hunt singing in her veins. This was nothing like the suffocating existence she had known in her father's house, where her greatest challenge was choosing between different shades of silk for a new dress. Battle stations, Valdez commanded, his voice carrying across the ship. The crew sprang into action with practiced efficiency, men scrambling up the rigging to adjust the sails, gun crews manning the cannons and boarding parties checking their weapons. Isabella moved to the rail, her own cutlass at her hip and a pistol tucked into her belt. She had learned to use both in the past weeks, her natural grace and determination making her a surprisingly quick study. The first time she had drawn blood in defense of her new life, she had expected to feel horror or revulsion. Instead, she had felt alive in a way she never had before. Remember, she called to the gun crews, we want their cargo, not their lives. Damage the rigging, not the hull. Dead merchants can't tell us where they've hidden the real treasure. The English frigate tried to run, but the Crimson Tide was faster and her crew more experienced. Within an hour, the enemy ship was disabled and flying a white flag of surrender. Isabella led the boarding party herself, her boots ringing against the enemy deck as she strode across the gangplank. The English captain, a portly man with terror in his eyes, stepped forward with his hands raised. I am Captain Morrison of His Majesty's ship Intrepid, he stammered in heavily accented Spanish, apparently mistaking Isabella for a Spanish noblewoman. Your Spanish is terrible, Isabella replied in perfect English, enjoying the way his face paled. Try again, Captain Morrison. And this time, tell me about your real cargo. We carry only legitimate trade goods, sugar, tobacco, rum. Isabella drew her pistol in one smooth motion, pressing the barrel against Morrison's throat. Around them, his crew shifted nervously, but her own men kept their weapons trained on the English sailors. Captain Morrison. Isabella's voice was silk over steel. Do you know what I hate most about men like you? You assume that because I'm a woman, I'm either stupid or weak. I am neither. She pressed the pistol harder against his neck. Now shall we discuss your real cargo? Or shall I let my crew demonstrate why they call this the Crimson Tide? Morrison's resistance crumbled like a house built on sand. The cargo hold. There are chests. Gold and silver bound for the governor of Jamaica and letters. What kind of letters? Military correspondence. Troop movements. Plans for new fortifications. Isabella smiled, lowering her weapon. Intelligence was worth more than gold in the current political climate. Now we're getting somewhere. Carlos. She gestured to one of her crew members. Take a detail below and secure those chests, and bring me those letters. As her men dispersed to loot the ship, Isabella found herself face to face with a young English officer who had been standing silently behind his captain. Unlike Morrison's obvious terror, this man's blue eyes burned with barely contained fury. You're Isabella Vasquez, he said quietly, the governor's daughter who turned pirate. Former governor's daughter, Isabella corrected. Current co-captain of the Crimson Tide, and you are? Lieutenant William Hartwell, and I'm here to deliver a message from your father. The world seemed to tilt beneath Isabella's feet. Her father? After selling her like chattel, he dared to send messages? Speak, she commanded, though her voice remained steady. Hartwell glanced around at the pirates surrounding them, then leaned closer. Governor Vasquez is prepared to pay ransom for your return. 10,000 pieces of 8 plus a full pardon for Captain Valdez and his crew. Isabella threw back her head and laughed, a sound that carried across both ships like breaking glass. 10,000 pieces of 8? How flattering. That's twice what he sold me for. You're his daughter, Hartwell pressed. He realizes he made a mistake. He wants to make amends, does he? Isabella's eyes glittered dangerously. And what makes him think I want to return to a life of embroidery and obedience after tasting freedom? Before Hartwell could answer, Valdez appeared beside her, having crossed from the Crimson Tide. His presence seemed to fill the deck, and several English sailors stepped back instinctively. Problems, Mirena? He asked, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword. Nothing I can't handle, Isabella replied. Lieutenant Hartwell was just delivering a message from my former father. It seems he's willing to pay handsomely for my return. Valdez's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. And what did you tell him? Isabella turned to face Hartwell, making sure every man on both decks could hear her words. Tell Governor Vasquez that his daughter died the day he sold her. In her place stands Isabella Valdez, Queen of the Caribbean Sea. And queens, she drew her cutlass, the blade singing as it cleared its sheath, do not negotiate with men who traffic in human flesh. The steel point came to rest against Hartwell's throat, and Isabella leaned close enough to whisper in his ear. But give him this message as well, I will see him again. When I sail into Port Royal Harbor flying my own colors, he will learn what his betrayal has cost him. She stepped back, sheathing her weapon with practiced ease. Now get off my prize ship, Lieutenant, and take your coward captain with you. You have lifeboats. Use them. As the English crew was herded into their boats and set adrift with minimal supplies, Isabella stood at the rail of the captured frigate, watching them disappear into the distance. Valdez moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. Isabella Valdez? He asked, amusement coloring his voice. She turned to face him, noting the way the tropical sun brought out the silver in his storm-gray eyes. Is that a problem, Capitan? On the contrary, he replied, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. I can think of nothing I would like more than to have you bear my name. The question is, what kind of marriage are you proposing? Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, but she met his gaze steadily. The kind where we rule the Caribbean together, as equals, as partners in crime and in bed. And if I said I wanted more than a partnership, if I said I wanted to make you my wife in truth, not just in name. The sea breeze whipped Isabella's hair around her face as she considered his words. 3 months ago, she had been a pampered prisoner in her father's house, her future mapped out by men who saw her as nothing more than a bargaining chip. Now she stood on the deck of a captured enemy ship, wearing a pirate queen's crown of her own making. Then I would say, she replied, stepping closer to him, that you had better be prepared to marry a woman who will never bow to any man's will, not even yours. Valdez's answer was to pull her into his arms and kiss her with all the passion of a man claiming his queen. Around them, both crews cheered, but Isabella heard nothing except the sound of her own heart beating in rhythm with the waves against the hull. When they finally broke apart, Valdez rested his forehead against hers. Welcome to your kingdom, Mirena. May we rule it well. Isabella looked out over the endless expanse of Caribbean blue, dotted with islands that held untold treasures and unlimited possibilities. Somewhere out there, her father waited in his crumbling mansion, probably counting the days until his debts came due. He had sold her for gold, thinking he was discarding a useless daughter. Instead, he had forged a queen, and queens, Isabella thought as the Crimson Tide's black sails filled with wind. Remember those who wronged them. The storm was coming and she would be riding at its head,